I want to turn now to our discussion on the nexus of this controversy, really. The country of Ukraine borders Russia, possesses one of the most deadly anti-tank weapons in the United States military arsenal. Look, this is one impressive piece of hardware, folks. In fact, rather than describe it, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to show you what it does. Take a look. See that thing right there? That thing's capable of flying almost unlimited space compared to most of those shoulder harnessed missiles, and then travel across, then capture one of the tanks as it's coming across and essentially nail it. It's incredibly powerful. It's a major issue that Ukraine has these weapons, by the way. You see, this Javelin, which is what it's called, you may have heard that in the president's conversation with Zelensky, it's designed to take out tanks, which Russia has aplenty. It has a symbolic value as well. And you know what that is? To send a message to Moscow, don't mess with us, Moscow, because we can take out your tanks, okay? I mean, this is what Ukraine is trying to say by having this $400 million Javelin program furnished by the United States. Now, let's take a look at Ukraine on a map. I think this is important as well. On its eastern half, the part of the country that looks with sympathy on Moscow, the country borders Russia. On the west, a region that in some parts is extremely nationalistic and hates Moscow, the country borders or is very near to a number of NATO countries: Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, Slovakia, Poland, Lithuania. Of course, these are generalizations, but nonetheless, just to give you a sense of the character or the culture of this country. So the country is kind of being torn, right, if not torn apart. And the United States, our policies are kind of feeding into that by pushing the Ukrainian government to be more nationalistic, to arm itself more, a country which, by the way, has been known to exhibit neo-Nazi tendencies. Let's turn now to John Jordan. He's an expert on this type of geopolitical situation, and we're happy to have him to take us through this. John, I think I want to start with this. I'm looking at our relationship and how much we do and have to say about Ukraine after listening to the president's conversations. Shouldn't we be more interested in helping this new president with his economy, for example, his serious corruption issues, none of which have anything to do with Russia, rather than just giving them more weapons and building their war machine? Is our strategy correct, do you think, or is it a little too lopsided?
Well, President Trump and this whole imbroglio may have happened upon a larger truth, and that is the rampant corruption within Ukraine. Ukraine has a huge problem with this. It's stifling it's restraining their economy. It's a dominant political issue, and here we are sending aid to them. And prior to the phone call, we had even the Defense Department send a memo to the White House expressing reservations about sending some of this weaponry and releasing this aid to the Ukrainians. So, Hunter Biden and his $3.1 million, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Perhaps we ought to be working with Ukraine to reduce their levels of corruption, grow their economy before shipping them weapons on a wholesale basis. And there's actually a national security issue for the United States in this. When you ship weapons to unreliable countries or countries with unreliable and corrupt militaries, you oftentimes see those weapons be sold on the black market and wind up in the wrong hands. The United States has benefited from this, obviously, with Soviet armaments to a lot of the Arab states in the Arab-Israeli wars. America got its hand on a lot of Russian equipment. We can't afford to have some of these systems be sold by corrupt supply sergeants in the Ukraine and find them in the Iranians' hands, for example. So that's something we ought to be a little more circumspect before we send weapons so blindly to such basically an unreliable political system.
But it seems from just listening to what you're saying, John, that this military aid and this relationship, be it foe or not, that we have with Ukraine, has nothing the hell to do with Ukraine. It has everything to do with something else, and that's the United States' legacy and historic policy of needing to be at odds with Russia, right?
Well, we talk about this frequently, Rick, and here's another opportunity to do so. In the aftermath of the Cold War, there was a westward expansion of NATO into historically, Russian and the Russian sphere of influence. I mean, Russia had been invaded 3 times, if you count the Russian Civil War, by Western armies in the 20th century. So is it unreasonable to expect a negative Russian reaction to see former Soviet republics like the Baltics and perhaps the Ukraine become Western Western troops based there? Is that going to be alarming to the Russians? Yeah, I can understand why historically they have a deeper sense and more profound sense of history than we do, because their history is so has been so tragic and so bloody for so long.
Well, it's funny because, when you, on days like this, turn to Fox and CNN and MSNBC and NBC and all the other networks, they're just going on and on and on about how essential it is for us to do this with Ukraine. And the question's never asked, why? Why? To look at it geopolitically. So we're glad you take us through this, John. We certainly appreciate the conversation. See you again soon, my friend. So you haven't heard that we're the ones covering the stories that you won't see covered anywhere else? In Venezuela, Kazakhstan. Let's go to Hong Kong. And the media reaction to that has been crickets. How about the way we cover those stories? What the hell does that mean? Huawei, Huawei, Huawei. That's the key word in this case, uprising. Keep? Can you believe that? Watching. This is the right thing for members of the media to do, to actually pick sides. Look, if you like what you see, subscribe.